Good afternoon, good evening, one and all. Thank you for being with us. That's almost the last session, last but one. I'm Sylvie KAUFFMANN. I'm a journalist for Le Monde, and I'm in charge of geopolitics and the conflicts between the main powers. And that's why Jean Hervé has entrusted me with this task to be, that is, the moderator for this session. We'll be redefining the social contract. I'd like to thank him for that, because that was a great opportunity for me to delve into the matter, which is awfully important if we look at what's happening geopolitically speaking around us, because what's at stake is our European identity. And frankly, I must say that our corporates have to adapt to a national environment which is going through difficulties, complicated but demanding. And also, we have to adapt to the international landscape where our European values and humanist values are being challenged. So, redefining the social contract in enterprises to try and understand the remit of modern companies and their missions, given the CSR objectives, social and environmental objectives. This is what we'll try and do during this panel discussion, and that'll last more or less an hour. And we have amazing panelists who will be talking about this. Sanda OJIAMBO, who's the Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director of the UN Global Compact. Olivier Gavalda, who's the Deputy CEO of Crédit Agricole. Pascal DEMURGER, who's the CEO of MAIF and co-president of the Mouvement Impact of France. Sophie BELLON, Chairwoman and CEO of Sodexo, and Florent, the head of the Michelin Group. And Yann ALGAN will be setting the stage so that we get started. Thank you very much, Sylvie. Good evening, one and all. We're very happy to be with you. I'd like to thank all of the speakers, outstanding speakers. Thank you for being with us, even though it's a bit late. It's almost the last session. Now, to get started, let me start with a current situation that we analyzed with Daniel Cohen in Les Origines du Populisme. That is, we see that our existing social contract is being challenged. And the question is, we think that companies can play a role and can be a promise of a renewal. We've seen two massive changes. The first one is that people now tend to distrust, that is, the population tend not to trust their governments, the institutions, and the policymakers. And when we analyzed the reasons, we realized that usually it was based on feelings. The feeling that the governments had turned a blind eye on them, given the rise in capitalism and the financial crisis in 2007, globalization and deindustrialization that ensued, and also in the light of automation risks and nowadays AI. That's what people were afraid of, the majority of the population. But the second wave is perhaps a deeper shock. And this, we think, is typical of our post-industrial society, which is no longer a society of people nowadays are much more isolated than before, when we had different classes, with people who feel alone at work and in the different regions. They feel some type of solitude, for which we need to find a solution, which would be a new social contract. And they feel solitude, they feel on their own, and people are angry. If you look at all the tweets in France and what the French have been saying in the past 10 years, the main emotion that's carried through is anger. And the numbers have increased since the yellow vests in France. So everybody's looking at companies being the next solution. Companies are not the only place, but it's a place where we can perhaps overcome a number of difficulties and where people can be at peace. There are three major challenges, we think, that we'll be talking about. The first thing is to support the climate change. What about the working conditions in the future? What about the novel practices, the new management practices in these enterprises, in a world that'll be strongly impacted by global change? Climate change. The second shock is AI. Many documents say that there will be fewer jobs destroyed than what we thought, but the tasks will change and will be reallocated differently. Some of the tasks will disappear and will be replaced. How can we provide support to people during this transition? And the third transition that people fear is social transition. Since COVID, we've seen that new generations look at the world of labor in a different way. They have different aspirations, and the younger ones have different desires. They want also a good work and life balance and something better balanced. And also, what's underlying all that is that people want to have a job that makes sense, a good job with an ethical dimension. And people want to walk the talk, because we've talked a lot for the past years, but now you're lucky because during this panel discussion we have CEOs of large companies that decided to act. So we'd like to thank you. This is really an honor to have you. Thank you for sharing the initiatives that you've set up to redefine the social contract. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sonia OJIAMBO, we'll start with you so that we have the full view, if I can say, so that we better understand the ins and outs of all this. You are at the head of the UN Global Compact. That's something that emerged in the year 2000, 24 years ago, at the initiative of the SG, and the view is to improve the impact of the private sector on the enforcement of sustainable the SDG objectives, the Sustainable Development Goals. What would you say about this today, please, madam?
Well, thank you very much, and apologies, I'm going to speak in English because I stopped learning French in the first year of university. I haven't spoken a lot since then. But really great to be part of this discussion, and you talked about the UN Global Compact, Sylvie, and I'll take just a few minutes to talk about what we do and then go into the topic areas. First, just to acknowledge, actually, all of the members on the panel here have had some interaction with the Global Compact. One of you, I'll ask you to come back, but all of you are members of the UN Global Compact, and it shows what we do, which is we try to unite businesses to make sure that they can contribute to their national development plans, to sustainable business, and certainly now to the Sustainable Development Goals. A little bit about the Global Compact, and then I'll go to the topic of the day. We were founded in the year 2000, as the moderator said. We're now 23,000 companies worldwide. We have about 60 chapters around the world. Here in France, we have the Global Compact Network France. Monsieur Florent MENEGAUX at the end is the president of the board there, and Nils sitting opposite me is the executive director, with close to 2,000 companies and very active and present in France. But we have a global footprint around the world. In 2003, very interestingly, Jacques Chirac, along with Kofi Annan, who was a Secretary General, helped mobilize a lot of businesses around the fact that no country can grow and no economy can grow without strong interaction between the private sector, policymakers and government, and civil society. So that's really what the Global Compact aims to do. I think if I just talk a little bit about the topic of the social contract and trust, there's three things that I'd ask you to take away from my 5-minute intervention. The first, and why the social contract is so important, is that business cannot succeed when society is failing. I'll say that again. Business cannot succeed when society is failing. It's been shown in many times you could have a very successful business, but political shock, economic shock, and social shock will always shake the fundamentals of a business. And I think that's absolutely important. The second, and we're going to talk about this, is the huge trust deficit that exists right now around the world. And that deficit exists between North and South, East and West, large companies, small companies, political parties, age, gender, religion. There's so many ways in which the world is fractured right now. So restoring the social contract is so important, and business must be part of it. The third, and it's my firm belief, that the Sustainable Development Goals, I'm wearing the pin over here, are the only remaining hope I think we have to unite the world in many ways, across government, across business, across civil society, and across the citizenry. Let me talk a little bit more in detail about this. This year we have close to 60 elections. We were talking about this in the preparation room. I know you have your own coming to bear on Sunday, but around the world, 4 billion people will be going to vote by the end of this year. But what does this mean? It's a lot less, you know, yes, the transitions that may or may not happen in political leadership, but it gives a very strong signal to what will the economy be like? What will the environment for business be like? What will happen around important issues such as climate? What will happen for social cohesion? What will the policies be for migration, for inclusivity? What will be some of the issues around education, healthcare, and social welfare? So a vote is not simply about which party wins or which candidate wins, but it really defines what happens to society. The challenge that we face right now is that everything remains fragmented, as I mentioned. So this and the vote is, I think, one big way that we can look at rebuilding trust if you look at the impact of those votes and the political systems that we have. As I mentioned, business will not succeed if society is failing. So what is really important and what we talk about in the Global Compact is the need for businesses to sit with policymakers and really talk about some key issues. If I highlight some in Europe that I think can advance business and the role that it does, first is compliance and regulation. How do businesses act responsibly? How do they react to issues such as human rights, labor, the environment, anti-corruption, gender, inclusivity, not just in the headquarters, but around the world where they have the footprint? Very, very important. My last point I was going to talk about simply around the social contract and why that is really important. In very few places, I think, other than the UN, which is why I'm very proud to work there, does government, business, and civil society sit together. Every year, the UN comes together in September. It's a really important moment. And I think we just need to highlight at this point in time that we all need to work together to rebuild that social contract and trust. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sanda. Olivier Gavalda.
Olivier Gavalda. Now, to pick on what Sandhya has just said, the private sector and economy will not succeed if society fails. What's the role of companies then? Is it to create value or links between people, connections? I'll come back to this, but first, let me give you some type of backdrop information, as Yann was saying, but I'd like to insist on these points. Number one, what we're seeing is that there's a slow erosion in terms of in the field of trust. The people who work or live in France and in the Western hemisphere, and an erosion of trust in the political parties and politicians. It started 30 years ago, and the French, more particularly, still trust corporates. The latest reports show that more or less 60% of the French population trust companies. They say that companies are in a position to change our society, or at least to do things for us to have better living conditions. That's the first general thing I wanted to share with you. The second thing is that we've seen that the transitions have accelerated very quickly. Population, technological, environmental transformations, which means that this has put pressure on all the institutions, public institutions, but of course, enterprises as well. Well, people expect a lot from us, so we have to live up to what they want. It's our role. It's important for our people, our workforce. We need a system that's with coherence or cohesion, rather. So, this being said, the only role or goal for a company, if it were only to look at the bottom line, the profit, that's the past. And we need to tread on a different path, which is we need to embark on social transformation and provide people with support during this transformation. This is what we call the purpose or usefulness at Crédit Agricole. We have to be useful. We have to draw up offerings and services for them that match their needs, but we have to be useful in society in general. And yet we have to be a profitable bank, which is what we do. And that's why Crédit Agricole several years ago decided to have a purpose, which is to act every single day for its clients and for society. So we've decided to embark on that project, and sorry for this jargon I'm going to use, we've decided to, well, in this client project and the human project and the people project we want to factor in the social dimension. It's not a side. It's not a blotch on the landscape. It's not just yet another CSR policy. It's included in our client project and social project. It's factored in. We've included the social dimension. Now, let me substantiate this with two very clear examples. First, what's very important is social inclusion. We've seen that, if you listen to our politicians, people are talking about the purchasing power. Well, at Crédit Agricole, we've decided to include this dimension, the purchasing power, in anything that we do. In all the banking offers we have the Echo range, we do this. That's our internal jargon, so that all of our clients have a banking solution, thanks to which they can be satisfied. Low-cost insurance policies, a bank account which is almost free of charge, so that we would make life simpler and nicer for them. And also, we're very much engaged on the environmental transition. Let me give you two examples again. The one that everybody knows about Crédit Agricole and the other French banks in general, which is we've decided to belong to the Net Zero Alliance, to accede to this alliance, and to stop any E&P activity, exploration and production of gas or oil. We're almost the only bank that has stopped that, funding exploration, E&P activities. And we've decided to totally reshuffle the business so as to finance this energy transition even more. As we speak, Crédit Agricole finances green energies more than brown. There's more green than brown, and we're proud. We're proud because we think that by 2030 or 2035 we'll have phased out these funds going to the brown energy. And if I still have time, I'd like to say that apart from that, stopping to finance oil and gas, we've decided to develop a new business line called the energy transition, Crédit Agricole Transition Énergie. The objective is to make sure that everybody in France and in Italy, in Poland tomorrow, is well equipped with the proper tools so that they have access to very local sources of green energy production. Any individual or even small firms that wouldn't have enough money, not just to finance, but to have and produce green electricity, because science says that everybody has to be involved, individuals themselves and SMEs as well. Otherwise, we'll never be net zero in 2050. These are two examples, but let me insist on this. That is, we want to include the social dimension throughout our business lines in our bank, and it's not an easy thing to do. Well, thank you very much. Pascal DEMURGER. I think we've talked at length about trust and the lack of trust. What about you at MAIF? I suppose it's very important for you as well, trust is. Before I answer, Sylvie, if I may, let me come back to the company's engagement. Well, I've been convinced for years that companies have a role to play in society. 5 years ago, I wrote a book that was about the political company. That is, companies have an impact on society. That's the role they have to play in the field of the environmental transition, social transition, diversity, inclusion, etc. In the light of what we see today, and I'll come back to this question of trust, and to pick on the three themes that I recall from what you said, Yann, in your introduction. There's a distrust, people feel isolated, and there's anger. The first two reasons, the causes rather, sorry, and anger is the consequence. So people distrust what's happening and their anger, which means that we, the leaders, the political leaders or heads of companies, have to be up to our responsibilities. People are angry, and there's some type of hatred in France nowadays, is because, in a certain way, I'd say that we the leaders have done something wrong. If you look at what's happened in the past 40 years, we've been heading companies in a general way. And by the way, we, the panelists, are a bit different because we have 4 companies that are quite engaged, but in a general way, I'd say that we're at the head of companies, and we in France have looked at the bottom line, the financial earnings of the company, the short term. We've forgotten about the role of our people, our workforce, the fact that we need to care for them, attention given to people, sincere attention to your workforce, trust. And this distrust that people express against the elite and Paris, what's it based on? Well, it's fed by the fact that we've not done enough for our workforce to play a role in the field of governance. We've not helped them execute in a better way. People feel some type of unease at work, and this leads to social unease as well. This is something that we have to remember. We have to look at ourselves, that is, all the CEOs, the leaders here at Aix-en-Provence or elsewhere. I think it's important at this moment in time because we're really close to the cliff or chaos, and we have to be responsible businesses. Right, now what does that mean? Well, it means that tomorrow, well, what I mean by tomorrow is tomorrow morning we'll have to lead our companies differently. We can't continue and lead our country or lead our companies the way we've been leading them so far, usually. Which means, as I was saying, we have to pay more attention to the way we interact with all of our people, which means more trust. It means more attention given. It also means more sharing. Sharing value, of course. If you look at the widening gap in the past 10 years between revenues from capital and from labor, well, there's a problem, and we can't continue like this. But sharing is not just about sharing value, it's sharing power as well. Which means, what's the role of employees and workers in the governance bodies of companies? Is it a seat on the board, at best? Do we really listen to them? These people are the ones on the ground. They know what's happening. They know the problems that the company has on the ground. And of course, these are the ones who can come up with very smart ideas that work well. The other point is the question of democracy, corporate democracy. Usually that's a word that people don't use in companies. A company is not a place where there's democracy. So the leaders should be accountable as well. That's true. And yet, we'll have to work on the basis of more cooperation. We'll have to listen to all the labor representatives. And we need to consult with the workforce so that they're involved. And, of course, we have to think in the long run. We need to think in the longer run so that we have a good transition. We shouldn't just have the nose on the grindstone and the quarterly results. And there'll be no business if there's chaos, and there'll be no transition if we don't have a united society or population. Thank you very much. Sophie BELLON, you're at the head of a company that has, I suppose, more than 400,000 employees. Your father was the founding member, Pierre BELLON. He was what we call a social boss. That's his thinking about people. And he said, we have failed. We're the bosses. We have failed. What would you say about this? Well, the Sodexo story or journey started something like 60 years ago, not far away from here in the city of Marseille. And I'm very happy to be here in Aix to talk about Sodexo. And, well, the social contract today, I think, is, as you said, we have more than 430,000 people working for our company, and we are the first private employer in the world. So, back to the social contract. We had this contract since the word go. We have 430,000 people working for us in the world, 28,000 in France, with 33,000 sites. 33,000 sites in the world, 4,000 sites in France. So we're present in the regions, in Marseille, in Aix, in Paris, in Lille, in Strasbourg. We are in schools, in hospitals, in old people's homes, in football stadia, everywhere. We're ubiquitous, and we have this local anchoring. And our people, our workers and employees, are here to help millions of people, more than 80 million people year in, year out. And as I said, it all started 60 years ago. And today, we're the first French employer in the world and 16th employer globally. We stand out. We're different. And we have to remain different. At the time, my father, I remember, had this vision and this desire. He said he wanted the mission to be endowed with two objectives: better living conditions for the workers and employees and the people we serve, but also what he wanted to contribute to the economic, social, and environmental development of people. And I was thinking, economic? Question mark? Yes. If economic results are not good, the company is going to die. So economic, social, environmental. The three words were the words we used 60 years ago. But today we have to do more than that. And this is what people expect from us. This is what anybody expects from us. There's trust. People trust corporates, but they don't trust in general. And that's something we see. They don't really trust people in France, but not just in France. So we're a company and we are leaders and CEOs of companies. We have to do more, which is what we're trying to do at Sodexo, because we know we have a global impact. Let me give you an example. We shouldn't be happy with our company DNA. We have to do more. Let me give you a recent example. What we decided to do, and that's last year, we decided to hatch a program called Vita for each person who works for us, with a life insurance, a life policy that they can subscribe to, with a maternity leave, and also if you're a caregiver, you can take days off. And if our people have problems, they get some type of support. Maybe it's not going to change quite a lot in France, but in other countries, I can tell you, in India, in the United States, for instance, a maternity leave. In the US, that's something that almost doesn't exist. So it's an important engagement, and I can tell you that we are a company in which we're not developing special technologies or to prepare consumer goods or something like that. We have tens of thousands of people who are here to serve millions of consumers daily. And we have more than 22 billion, and therefore our pay package is more than 40% of our revenues. That is 9 billion, which means that when we take this commitment, which is to do a number of things in the company, in the same way, in all the countries where we operate, and this for all groups of people and workers and employees, that's a very strong commitment. And I headed the operating unit 2 years ago, and we agreed with the steering committee, the management committee, with all the heads to do more. It's part of our DNA. And that's something important because our DNA is very important. That's the corporate culture, but we want to do more today. And then the final point that I'd like to come to, I don't know if I'll still have some time. The last thing I wanted to say, as I was saying in passing, is that we are a global company, but also a local company. In India, we're Indian. In the US, we're American. In Italy, we're Italian. In France, we're French. And that means that our duty is to give a clear heading to our teams, but we have to do things differently.
We also have a very strong commitment to the food transition. For example, in India, we have 90% of the population who are vegetarian. There we have having decarbonized menus is not really relevant, but in terms of energy, and they still use coal a great deal. So here we can help them change. And in Brazil, for example, Louis, in the contrary, they eat a lot of meat, and there we can have an impact to change things. On the other hand, but they use a lot of hydroelectricity. And so on that subject, they are in a very good position already. So what I want to say also there is that in a group like ours, we also have to use the innovations of one country, of one region, and what we've learned from certain teams and certain of our customers to be able to use it to help other teams and other countries, and that's something that's wonderful. And of course, in France, we're very mobilized for the Olympic Games, and despite what's happening in the political sphere, it's going to be a wonderful event for us to have these to be participating in the Olympic Games. We're very pleased to be selected for this because about 30% of our income is of our recipes will be vegetarian for athletes and 70% for the general public. The athletes are going to eat at the Cité du Cinéma, which it's a real building where they're going to be eating. So we've made commitments in that area. And another example is that... no more time. Okay, I have some other examples. Never mind. Okay, I'll stop there. Okay, thank you very much. We need to keep a bit of time for the discussion. So, Florent MENEGAUX, I'll end with you. You've made a lot of noise a few months ago when you were talking about proposing a decent salary, deciding that you were going to provide a decent salary. You putting this in place in your company, in the Michelin Group, if I'm not mistaken, which would be 1.5 or twice the minimum wage in each country. You'll tell us about that in more detail, but above all, you've taken that step because you have become aware of a problem. Which you've just heard 60% of people trust their company. Do you think that businesses and companies are the solution to help reduce this general distrust that is eroding our societies? Well, yes. In fact, I'd like to point out what a company is for. A company is above all a human organization, a human intentional organization that makes solutions, can be products or services, but it manufactures solutions. What we often forget that it's voluntary. If people don't want to work, the company will disappear. So a company is a human collective, and we have to take care of that because this human collective is centered around manufacturing a good. It can be a goods or services to be used in the future, which will enable others to join this form of human association, which is very effective. There are other forms of association in society that do other things, but a company is a voluntary social form that is most effective to produce solutions for tomorrow, whether they're products or services. The second thing is that essentially, why is this human form of organization so effective? And this has been the case for a very long time. It's because everybody finds what they need in it. You have to understand that when you manufacture goods and services, if you allow people to express their talents, they will develop and grow. So they will find what they need in their activity. This comes back to the idea of value sharing. There's a value that is created, and so it's perfectly normal that the people who are manufacturing this value are able to participate and share in this value. So if we come back to this basic phenomenon, first of all, it's a development platform. When you're talking about a company, and people do this voluntarily. Why do they do this voluntarily? Why do they remain motivated and engaged? Above all, because they're working for something that goes beyond them. It will enable them to help them in their personnel development and to help them to go further. So we always have to point out that this is something that has to be looked after. If you reduce people to a mechanical function, and if you say they're just super machines, you haven't understood anything. A company will not work properly if you do that. In fact, Taylorism ended up in a caricature of this function of translating people who have very developed capacities into being a machine. The risk with more sophisticated technologies is that the human response to this more sophisticated technology will be to say, okay, we're not interested in a world of machines. We want to be a world of humans, because otherwise humanity has no meaning. And so we have to work on these kinds of questions. The second thing is that a company constantly innovates, otherwise it dies. It's just a question of time. So it has to constantly innovate because the markets change, the circumstances around the company change, the world is constantly changing, so the company has to innovate. And that's the best place to innovate. And that's the second dimension. The third point is that it is not a political object, but it is not a place where people involved in political discourse. Although it is a political object, we welcome everybody. The more diverse a company is, the stronger it is, and the richer it will be, and the more capacity it will have to innovate. And we are more intelligent together than just the total of the individual intelligences. So the company is right at the heart of the subject. For the collective intelligence to work, trust has to be there. You can't build trust if you have social poverty and misery in your company. What trust contract can you have is if the basic trust is not there to start with? What I often say is to company is how much did it cost you and what was the budget? And that's never put in the agenda. They haven't calculated how much it would cost them. They say if the performance of a company at Michelin is based on salaries that do not enable a family to make a living, to have a house and to be able to use transport, etc., and to have enough food and to make some savings, and in fact, in that case, our business model has no purpose. We have to do that. Of course, fortunately, Michelin has had a social contract for more than 150 years. There's nothing new for us, but we have asked that question during the COVID. We asked, in concrete terms, are we faithful to our reason for being? Is our human community solid? Is it our human communities robust? And we realize there are several thousand employees around the world who are not being paid in these conditions. And so we've made this decision. We took this decision and we said, whatever the price is, it's better for us to decide not to do business rather than to establish our business on a foundation which is not solid. Because the foundation for Michelin's success is social cohesion of the people who work for Michelin. People who work for Michelin are very engaged. They are developing properties, goods together, and all of this, the employees have participated in this. Every year we carry out a survey of our employees to see how they are. We start all our meetings with a very simple question at the executive committee where we say, how are you? That's the first question we ask. That's where it starts. Human relations start there. It starts with very simple things. We forget this in our societies because technologies enable us to communicate much more quickly. We've forgotten that human relations is not just a question of technology. But when you ask your employees, how are you, what do they answer? Because you have the impression in France that they're not doing very well. They are doing better and better year after year, despite all of the difficulties. And in fact, if you look at, we have a very high level of engagement. It should be better. We still have some toxic management practices. We have people who are still afraid, people who aren't able to express themselves fully. I have things that are still dysfunctional. But overall, structurally, we are making progress, and we have been through some terrible crises. This happens very frequently. But basically, as we come back to the essential things and saying, is our human community doing okay? We're able to get through these crises. Okay. Let me come back now. We have a small contradiction here which we have to sort out together in the time that remains to us. Sanda OJIAMBO, at the worldwide level and perhaps the European level, isn't there a kind of currently an increase in the social commitment of companies and the engagement of companies to achieve the sustainable development goals? Is there maybe a reduction in the commitment or an increase?
And thank you, panelists, for sharing more within your companies. What we see at the UN Global Compact is a continued increase in the number of companies who commit to our 10 principles of doing work.
Dans le nombre d'entreprises, mais dans leur
the number of companies, but the level of commitment. The level of commitment, is that decreasing or increasing?
I'll tell you what I think people are a little bit more worried about. Fewer CEOs want to be very bold and be on the stage and talk about that engagement. So there are fewer advocates because there's a lot of backlash. There's backlash, in the United States against ESG. There's backlash if a CEO stands up and says something, it's interpreted about politics. We were just talking in the back room about wearing a mask in the pandemic and how in certain places that was, seen as a political system, a political sign. So I applaud CEOs who stand on the stage and talk about what's important and social contract, but that's where I see some of the backlash. Fewer, feel that they're safe talking about these issues, but yet, as I think a colleague said here, many in the world are looking at CEOs because they still trust CEOs and they trust the business institution.
Mm-hmm. Merci beaucoup. Alors,
thank you very much. Who would like to answer this contradiction that we've just identified? At the same time, there's a certain level of unease at work. There's some social difficulties in the French society, certainly a level of anger and a lack of trust. Do you not feel that in your companies? Is this something you see? Don't you think that our companies and the company leaders have a responsibility for this situation that is shared by other sectors of society, of course, as well? But don't you have that impression that you have a certain responsibility? Just to add something, what I see in my job is I meet a lot of company leaders and I come back to what has just been said because I think it's very important. And this is a paradox of the situation you've just underlined. I'll allow Pascal to explain that in more detail. I meet companies who say to me that their main concern is their employees, their well-being and their engagement. And all of them say to me that they are mobilized to work in this area. I won't come back to the explanations that we've already heard, which I totally agree with. And they see continuous progress of their engagement and the level of satisfaction, etc. All of our companies measure this every day. Maybe not every day, but very regularly. So I see these indicators improving, not only in our companies, but in all of the companies. So this is the paradox we have to try to explain. I think that the company, because today it has taken on a role for societal transformation, it has a high level of trust. I think it's important to talk about this human association. The things is maybe the reason why it's successful, because it's a question of proximity and the understanding of the common objective and working together. And I can only observe that there is this paradox. Pascal, this doesn't happen to us very often, but I don't think I'm as optimistic as you are, in fact, about the well-being of employees in their respective companies. I was saying earlier, I very much believe that the unease at work leads to unease in society. There are a lot of companies where, in reality, there's a lot of people who are unhappy. But we have to be careful when the difficulty when you're running a company is that you have an acute sense of responsibility. As Sophie and Florent has explained, and you also, Olivier, you've explained that. Of course, the point is, how do we manage to reconcile something that is vital? We have to achieve the vital economic performance of the company because they're a question of survival and sustainability in a world where there's fierce competition. How do you reconcile that with a concern for personal development of your employees and the concern to make sure customers are satisfied while remaining in a sense of commercial sufficiency, not being aggressive, and also the concern of the impact of the company on society in general? As far as we're concerned at the MAIF, for many years now, we have set up what we call, it's a bit of a technical word, the corruptics. Corruptics means that when you have a decision to make, you have a project to validate or an activity to monitor or to lead, we do it with 4 families of objectives. Of course, the first family is performance, whether it's commercial or economic, whatever, the performance for the company. We do this also through the question of determining whether what we are planning to put in place here, is it actually going to improve the personal development of our employees? Is it going to improve satisfaction of the company owners? Is it going to contribute to their transition, whether it's in environmental or societal? And when you systematically look at these four families of objectives, when it's completely integrated into the business culture and the corporate culture, what we're doing, in fact, is that we are choosing projects and orientations, and we take decisions which, in the long term, will add to the performance of the company, because each of the three elements in this quadriptych contribute to the overall performance of the company. Thank you very much. I have one last question before we move on to questions from the audience. For you, both of you who are leading multinational groups, how are you going to be able to reconcile this mission that you are trying to accomplish with social support and the social mission of the company? How do you reconcile that with worldwide competitors, either Chinese who have don't really have this kind of concern for their workers, or from America, where the main objective is to maximize profits? Is it possible? Are you going to be able to do that? Very quickly, please. In fact, it's true that we are a worldwide group. As I said, we are very local at the same time. In fact, at Sodexo, we have tens of thousands of people working for us who are looking after other men and women every day in very diverse environments: the world of education, health, businesses, sport, leisure. And in fact, when you think about it, and it's true that we have an engagement ever since the company was created for our employees, and this makes us different from our competitors. In particular, we don't have any big Chinese competitors. Maybe that's going to happen one day. We have big competitors in the US and in the UK. In fact, we all have our customers, and our scope represents 1% of carbon emissions. It's very limited. And our scope 3 is 1 and 2 of our customers. So scope 1 is very limited. For example, for Florent is my customer. I'd like to thank him for that. When Florent calls on us to provide our services, when we commit to look after their employees, to look after them, our employees working on his premises, serving his employees, we have an impact on that, on his company. I'm very positive. This is your asset. This is our asset, yes. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not easy at all, and we've been doing this for almost 60 years now, and we want to be more ambitious and go further in the future, because the world is telling us that we need to continue. Perhaps we've also forgotten to say here that, yes, the companies have a role to play. There are lots of things that where the situation is not very good. We've been through a number of crises, one after the other, over the last 5 years, which means that now people are angry, and they're right to be angry, because things are hard. But the positive point is that people still trust their company, and we are there to help, and we're here to help an ecosystem. I don't think companies are going to succeed by themselves. They'll succeed with the communities, with their suppliers, with the different NGOs and associations. That's how we'll all succeed. We have to succeed all together. Very quickly, in 3 words. Competition is very stimulating. In the Olympic Games, there are no athlete says, I don't want to have any I don't want to beat my competitors. They don't know how their competitors train. Competition is very stimulating for a company, provided that the rules of the game are the same. It's a level playing field. The secret is, regardless of the type of competition you're dealing with, you need to mobilize collective intelligence so that people are comfortable in what they do. And they decide to work together, and they understand they are more powerful and more effective when they work together. The other point, which is very important, is to always anticipate, to always disrupt your business model. Never think that what you have is perfect. You always have to anticipate and innovate continuously, and to continuously disrupt the way that you succeed today, saying that tomorrow things will be different, it won't work, and so tomorrow we're going to change things. So innovation is one of the keys to success in this hyper-competitive environment. Hyper-competitive environment also stimulates you. From that point of view, competition is also what helps humanity to make progress, provided human beings are able to find what they need in that. I'll take two questions, one here. Here we are, and another one. Madam. Okay, hello. Very quickly, please. Yes, I'll be quickest. This round table for me is a rather deforming mirror. You are known to be committed and engaged employers. It's true that for me, my job is to help link the economy to the human factor. I've been working on this subject for many years, and it's true that there is a backlash in terms of commitment and engagement at the moment. After COVID, everybody thought the world would change, and in fact, not much has changed, apart from working from home, but only for security and safety reasons initially. But there is a problem with that at the moment. So my question is not really for you, because you're already doing a lot of what needs to be done. My point is, to what extent, first of all, how could human resources play a more strategic role, and more globally, to what extent do you think the companies could perhaps analyze their relationship with the employees with the Dalmasio pyramid? Because I think this would considerably transform the contracts that they offer to their employees if they take account of the Dalmasio pyramid. The second question, please. We have 4 minutes left. Thank you for these very generous and pacifying presentations, which are rather exceptional, unfortunately, when you're talking about multinationals. If we could avoid the worst on tomorrow evening, don't you think it would be a very urgent matter to at last impose a true sharing and to ask the real people who are being assisted in our economy to make a greater contribution? For the people who are being assisted the most are the major shareholders of the major companies. This is, I'd like to say one thing. The shareholders are an absolutely vital partner for our companies. Without capital, there's no company. So, the second thing is that remuneration of the shareholder is legitimate. It's perfectly normal to pay a rent when somebody is taking a risk with you. They're putting their money into your company to enable you to grow. The shareholder and the dividend is not something that is contradictory with, and it's not something that goes against the well-being of the employee, because the employee is creating that performance that gives them a return on their dividend. The other point is that you should always consider that people are employees and also citizens. They are part of the world. They're part of the company as well, of the society in the world. And they're all of that at the same time. So you can't have an opposition between them. You can't have a opposition between the climate and individual. What's at stake here is humanity. So in the work of the company, we have to work on the sharing of value in these 3 dimensions, always at the same time. Maybe I didn't interpret your question properly about the shareholders. The shareholders are absolutely vital for a company. It's a key partner for the company. They have to be remunerated, and then you have to decide how you're going to do the investment, how you're going to keep people a decent wage, and how you're going to reduce the impact of all this on society, and how you make sure that a shareholder gets their remuneration. If you don't have a shareholder, you don't have a company. If you have no employee, you don't have a company either. So you need both. 1 minute. I'd just like quickly to come back to the observation that you made, Madam. You're saying we have here a wonderful range of company leaders who are very responsible and who are very committed to the social welfare of their employees. I'm saying they're not really representative of French companies, and I agree. So what do we need to do to make things change? I think we need 2 things. First of all, we need to make sure that company leaders understand that in reality, it's in the interest of their company, it's their economic interest to take this approach. I don't know of an engaged employee who is not a happy employee. I don't know of a brand that is loved by consumers that is not a brand that is sufficiently engaged. Certainly tomorrow it'll be more and more difficult for that not to be the case. That's not enough, though. We need to make sure that we need to know that when we call of the individual commitment of the company leaders and calling their sense of responsibility and calling on their sense of scruples, that's not going to be enough either. We also have to have a legal statutory framework which encourages this transition and encourages the engagement of companies. For example, you were talking about the possible opposition, and you may be right, between a certain amount of greed by certain shareholders and a short-term greed, for example, to reorganize the governance of companies to have a more long-term approach. There are things that need to be done. Perhaps voting rights at the General Assemblies should be proportional to the time for which people have held a share. Maybe there is something that needs to be done in terms of the governance of the companies. We don't have time to go into more detail there, but I think also we need to be able to support these changes on a regulatory way, because goodwill will not be enough. Thank you. We haven't sorted out all of the world's problems, but we have some ideas, I think. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to our panelists. I think we can give them all a round of applause. Thank you very much. And